What's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. I'm Ian from the Tech Interview Guide. Tonight we've got two awesome guests with us. Let me go over that screen here. We have Aaron and Spencer with us. Thanks, guys, for joining me tonight. Um, let's see, Spencer, you're in the LA area, and Aaron, where are you located again? Remind me where you're located. You're in the Bay Area? Suddenly, I can't hear Aaron. Oh, no. Oh, I forgot to unmute you guys from the other software where I muted you. Let's try that again. There we go. Hey, let's try that again. Welcome everybody. So Spencer, you're in LA, right? And Aaron, where are you located again? South Carolina. That's right. Yeah, you relocated out to East Coast. That's right. Yeah, good times. Yep. Which is funny because I was out in LA too. We were probably all out there, maybe around the same time, and I think Spencer and I had lunch once or twice or something over the
Yep.
years.
Drove down to Orange
Uh,
County.
Yeah, what was that place? It was some sandwich shop with like a bunch
Yeah,
of
I don't even
beers.
remember now.
Yeah, that place was good. Anyway, welcome. I really appreciate you guys helping out. Chat, if you're there, say hi, drop in, say hello, ask us questions. Tonight, what we want to do is kind of demystify a little bit of the HR side of what happens with your job application. So, the whole purpose of the tech interview guide and the whole idea around the stream is to hear my perspective on things, but also have folks like Spencer and Aaron hang out with us too, where we get to hear what they sort of think about different things. And so I'm super excited to have you guys on the show. So thanks for that. So let's kick off some intros a little bit. Aaron, why don't you get us started? Tell us a little bit about your background, like how you got into like HR recruiting side of things. Maybe like if you want to talk about some of the companies that you've worked at, kind of what you're up to. The other cool thing about how we kind of connected. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Cool. I I don't think so. I've actually got the live feed going on another system with the audio up. I don't hear you. Spencer, can you try saying something? No, I'm coming through. All right, so let me debug that real quick.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Why
Say
is this
again.
happening?
You got me?
No, we hear Spencer okay on the stream. We hear me on the stream. We're not hearing Aaron, but I hear Aaron twice. I hear you twice, like with that overlapped audio that we talked about, but your voice doesn't come through the stream at all. So let me diagnose that a little bit, and then we'll get going from here.
Here, I
Um,
can totally intro while you're dying.
yeah, that'd be great.
So hi, I'm Spencer Allen. I've been a recruiter in the LA area for about 10 years and some change. I started out in contingency and was trained by a woman who had been recruiting through the dot-com era. It was just a small firm that only focused on local startups in the dot-com space. It was really cool because I got to be trained in a model that she always considered exclusively local and in like a relationship-oriented capacity. Actually, the reason I'm here is because I've known Ian for almost the majority of my career now, and the way I've always tended to work was more a focus on like making friends with people who are relevant in my space and just keeping in touch, and also having a standard for clients that I would consider relatively high on basis of quality of life and stability.
So
After
Spencer,
10 years, oh,
sorry,
sorry.
just real quick, can you tell us what contingency means? Like,
Oh,
what does that mean
absolutely.
from a terminology point of view?
Sure. So contingency is usually kind of a supplement to internal recruitment efforts. It usually is a very high demand field that you're recruiting for, like engineering, where it's really hard to find people. But basically, we get pulled in almost to like just add to the menu if they don't have enough resources to really fill all their roles. And it'll usually be the hardest to fill roles on engineering. And I always specialized in engineering. I actually taught myself Python in my first year and kind of started building web scrapers to actually follow my competition locally. Like, I would say that like engineering has been my bread and butter for the last 10 years. But yeah, after 10 solid years of running contingency, my best and longest running client, she built signal sciences to acquisition with Fastly, and afterward took a CTO role at a small startup here in LA.
Cool.
And I kind of wanted to change things up and see what it was like to go in-house, and apparently take a pay cut and some equity. And now I run internal talent acquisitions for a small startup called Instill. We're like a CRM for nonprofits.
Great.
We just doubled our size over the last 6 months, so it's been fun.
That's great. Cool. And also on the show we got Aaron. Now we should be able to hear Aaron.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, your audio's coming through there now.
Is it working? Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that earlier.
Awesome.
Yeah, so Aaron, give us a little bit of update. Like, who are you? What's your background? Tell us a little bit about what you do and what you got going on the side and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I was saying before is I have a degree in criminal justice and a minor in nutrition, and then fell into recruiting because I had a friend who was a recruiting coordinator. She needed to replace herself because it was just a summer job. So her boss said, "You need to find your replacement." And she thought of me because I was working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car doing customer service, and so she thought, "You're probably really good at talking with candidates." So that is when I went to Riot Games. And so never in my life with a criminal justice degree did I think I'd be working at a video game company. And I'd always been a huge gamer. And so
Awesome.
when I got into recruiting, I was helping schedule interviews and bring candidates into the office and stuff like that for their on-site panels. And I just really fell in love with it. I just thought it was a lot of fun. I feel like it came naturally. So I stuck with it and kind of just moved up the ranks and was at Riot for about 5 years, then went to Bird for almost a year. And that was just, I wanted to experience the, fast-paced, crazy startup environment. So I went to Bird and got that. And then Procore actually kind of recruited me away from Bird because Bird would not do work from home, unfortunately, at that time. And so Procore it was a fully remote role. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. So I've been with Procore since early 2019.
That's great. I'm curious, what years were you at Riot Games?
2013 to 2018.
So it was before. Okay. So back in my days in Santa Monica, I was doing ad technology at the Rubicon project, which is now something else. It's like Midnight or something. And when I was leaving that job, like part of what I was doing there was a lot of real-time data analytics for ad tracking and things like that. And I actually had applied for a job at Riot Games that was posted specifically around like, let's capture all this data about the gamers and what they're doing and how they're interacting with things. How do we do that on a near real-time basis in a really scalable way? And I'm like, this is exactly what I'm doing, and I could go do it for a gaming company. This would be awesome. I applied for the job, never heard anything back from them for like 2 years. And then suddenly out of the blue one day, I get an email from a recruiter there, and they're like, hey, we got your application. It's like, yeah, I'm like 2 jobs later from that. Like, where have you been?
Thankfully that was not me.
That was pretty funny. Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wouldn't have been you. But I'm curious if you knew David Tomberlin at Riot
No,
Games.
I didn't actually.
Oh,
no.
He was a guy that I hired at SendGrid who left SendGrid to go work at Riot Games.
Okay.
Awesome dude, really tall. Like we called him the Viking. He's like big, tall, big beard, loves to work out.
Nice.
Really awesome dude, awesome developer, great human. Cool. Well, thanks for the intro for both of you. So doing things in house, partly why I wanted to have you both on the stream is to kind of hear a little bit about like what happens when somebody applies for a job. Like what sort of systems do you put in place for accepting a resume? Like, do you have online forms for that, or do you tell people to like just email us a resume and then like you kind of scan through those emails, or is it automated to like put those into like an Airtable or a greenhouse or something like that? What sort of systems do you both use or have you used in the past around like trying to automate some of that? Because you post a job, you're going to get like hundreds of people applying for that job. How do you sort of get through that initial crunch of like actually getting the resumes and getting the applications? Who wants to start? Who wants to kick that off?
Yeah, I can start. So I have used Greenhouse. I know you mentioned that. I've used Greenhouse the vast majority of my career. I've been recruiting for nearly 9 years. And I mean, with Greenhouse, so I've never had any automated system screening resumes. You can do a full keyword search in Greenhouse, or a full text search, so it actually searches the resumes as well. And I've used that occasionally, but for the most part, I mean, it really depends on the role. Some of the more entry level roles, I mean, it also depends on the company. But yeah, like for Riot, if we posted an entry level role, I mean, we get hundreds of applications in the first week or two.
Sure.
But we did go through all of them by hand. I would be
Wow.
screening resumes. I would block off time on my calendar to screen resumes. And I talk about this. I have a YouTube channel. I didn't mention that, but I talk about this on my YouTube channel. When I'm screening resumes, I maybe only need 10 to 20 seconds to look at a resume to know if I need to look at it more. So, if it's really good, I'll spend more time on it, but I can tell in 10 or 20 seconds if it's just not going to be a fit for the role, especially if it's, we have hundreds to go through. So,
Right. So
yeah.
10 to 20 seconds to go over a resume. What kinds of things are you looking for, like just really quickly at a glance? What are like some key indicators of like this is going to be a good resume versus not a good resume?
Yeah. So, well, that really depends on the role. For example, right now I'm recruiting for a senior business systems analyst for our finance systems at Procore. And the hiring manager said, this person must have Zora experience.
Oof.
And Zora
I'm
is some
sorry.
financial software that we use.
Yeah,
Oh
we
my
use that
goodness.
at
Yeah, I mean,
SendGrid. It's the
nobody.
worst.
Oh yeah. So, but she said this person must have Zora experience. So I can go to a resume and type in Zora. I even type in misspellings of Zora just in case. But if there's no Zora in there, I'm probably not going to talk to them unless, I sent a candidate over today where they had every single system that we use except for Zora. So I pinged the hiring manager. I said, hey, does this look good? But for the most part, that's some of the things I look for is like keywords and then job titles, years of experience. If we're looking for someone with 7 years of experience and you just graduated college a year ago, and it's like, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be a fit. So stuff like that can be really quick to weed out, especially if I have hundreds of resumes to go through.
Sure. Yeah, Spencer, what's your experience been like for that sort of thing?
So my experience is a little bit inverted because everything I've ever done has been on a sourcing capacity, like very low volume, very small teams with a very strict requirement of hiring for a startup is usually going to be a senior role for, say, engineering. So I would say that oftentimes, like if I'm looking at a resume because I'm doing something similar to what he's doing in the ATS, it's just I'm on LinkedIn actually going through hundreds of LinkedIn profiles based on a search and saying, this one goes in my database, this one goes in my database, this one doesn't, this one goes in my literally, like what I'll do is feed a web scraper, scrape that down and send it into my database to then go and message those people. And it's a similar criteria. Like it definitely has to fit the role based on what my hiring manager wants, but there are a lot of things that will light me up on a candidate. Usually it boils down to how descriptive and expressive you can be in your profile. That actually goes a very long way for me. Someone who can actually illustrate their communication skills. Like right now I'm hiring an account executive for my sales team. And I came across someone today who had written 3 blog posts that she's a good writer. She's a talented writer. And she was extremely opinionated about like cliches in the industry and saying things that people don't normally say. And she also happened to have built like go-to-market strategies from the ground up. So she was one of those people where like oftentimes my outreach, being a relationship-oriented recruiter, is kind of writing someone a bit of a love letter and saying like, hey, you look really interesting. Let's be friends. I want to work with you. Even if you're not looking right now, let's start a conversation. And when someone gives me that much material in their their LinkedIn profile, it makes my job a million times easier and I'm that much more likely to reach out. Even if they're not qualified, I want to build a long-term relationship with that person because they're kind of creating fertile ground for what I see as a long and good career.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember seeing a post on LinkedIn, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, and it was some kind of hiring manager, some kind of HR person, and they were basically writing it as a like a pretend letter, and they're like, "Dear entry level developer, I appreciate that you reached out to me with your message of, hey, I saw your job post. Can we grab a virtual coffee? In the time it took me to get the notification that you had pinged me on LinkedIn, I got 300 people applying for that job. So yeah, I'm happy to have that coffee, but I got to go weed through a bunch of resumes first." You know, part of what we would tell students at Turing is like, if you see a job post, it's almost too late. It's not necessarily too late to apply for that job, but it's pretty late in the game. When you see that job post, you need to apply pretty quick. Um, Depending on the level of role, like certainly for entry level developers, I'm sure that you've both experienced, like, you know, for entry level roles, like you're going to get a huge influx of university students, college students, boot camp grads, programs like Turing, that, you know, you're just going to get flooded with those. How can they sort of differentiate themselves at that early sort of application phase for like standing out? Because you know, whether you've only got a few seconds to look at the resume or a few seconds to kind of browse their LinkedIn, what can they do to really stand out, in your opinions? So again, like with most things on this stream, these are like our perspectives, but like, what are some things that like that could differentiate them, or sort of set them apart for that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can start. So I know for me, so a few things are very practical. One is I would say always submit your resume as a PDF. A lot of times, you know, applicant tracking systems, especially Greenhouse, can really mess up the formatting. It can be completely unreadable. It could just error out if you do a Word document or something else. So I would say always submit as a PDF. First of all, I think making the relevant information as clear as possible. If you are a fresh grad, I want to see like the school and your degree and your GPA if you have it. If it's like that type of entry level role. If not, I would say any relevant experience, just right up front. And I would say try to cross reference that with the job description. So look at the bullet points in the job description. A lot of times, at least in my experience, the first few bullet points are the most important ones. And so, in terms of like what they're looking for, so if that's what they're looking for, like if you have that type of experience, put that at the very top. And because as soon as I start scrolling, if that's the first thing I see, I'm like, oh, cool, like this person has the experience I'm looking for. So, I mean, that'd be my advice. I mean, it's very practical.
Cool. Spencer, how about you?
In the context of a startup, so this is the first time I've ever been in a situation where we're getting a lot of submissions through like built-in LA ads or something like that for a design or product role. Engineering's still a lot less passive, but I've had a couple of situations so far where, say, we were hiring a designer who needed to be kind of like 5th year minimum to be able to hold their own, just that we could provide them the mentorship they need to be successful. I think it's a big challenge in startups. I've had 2 or 3 people who got it at like the 3rd year in how to write a cover letter. And because I think what it is in a startup, especially, you're kind of being screened on your ability to show up as a known quantity. It's why, I mean, the entire interview process is basically designed to replicate someone's network who's bringing in their friend who they've already worked with. In an ideal world, we would just do that all the time because those are known quantities. We've already worked with them. We've already vetted them. So it's kind of the ability to look at a situation, spot the elephants in the room, identify them, and communicate about them right there on the spot. And I've had a couple of people in their cover letter say, like, I read your job description, I read about your founders, I read about your mission. Here's why those things are important to me. Here's why those mean something in my life. I understand that I'm not the right person for this job on paper, but I think I'm right because of these things. Like, nice. I've had a couple of people who forced me to interview them. That was like an amazing cover letter.
Yeah, that's great. We'll get into cover letters in a bit because I think that's an interesting topic. And going back to Aaron, so you mentioned submit a PDF version. I had actually heard something like 6 months, 10 months ago, saying that a lot of like the automated applicant tracking systems actually do better with Word documents than PDFs. But when I do resume reviews, I tell people to send me a PDF, so it's going to be the same on every system. And part of what's a little confusing, and we've talked about this on the stream before too, is if you send in a Word doc for the applicant tracking system to be able to kind of like pull out those keywords, then when the human reads it, you say the format can sometimes look a little garbled, and you look at that and go, this resume is junk, and like you don't want to move forward because you think everything they do is going to be junk. But if they send you a PDF that looks nice and is formatted nice, is the ATS going to get the information scraped out of it properly? Because I've certainly gone through PDFs where you like highlight all the text and you paste it in a text editor, and you see how the text shows up in different orders or backwards, or strips out all the white space, and so it mashes everything together, and so the keywords don't flag correctly. And so we've been sending people over to like jobscan.co as a website where you can like upload a resume, paste in a job description, and it kind of does some heuristics and some analytics on all of that to try to figure out, like, based on what they've written as their system, how well do they think you match that job description? Like, how well did you target their keywords? Things like that. And so, yeah, I think there's a bit of a kind of this running tally that I put in chat of like PDF 1, Word doc 0. Where in the past it's like, no, you should send in Word documents. And I had Jonan on the stream a while back where we were talking about the same thing, and he said as well, like, yeah, you should send in a PDF. And I'm like, but applicant tracking systems want Word docs. Have you heard anything like one way or the other, or have you directly experienced like, yeah, when they send in a Word doc, it like looks like crap?
It's definitely not every time, but I've just noticed like anytime something is messed up, it's because it's a Word doc. But yeah, Word docs don't mess up every time. And if that does happen, a lot of times I'll just quickly go, because usually they also link their LinkedIn profile. So like if the resume is really messed up, I'll just go and click their LinkedIn profile real quick and just kind of look at their background. But I've just found that I've never really had a problem with PDFs. And granted, like I said, I've never worked with an applicant tracking system that scans and like does or like any AI or anything like that. It's all been manual, and you can do keyword search, like I said, and it seems to work with PDFs just as well as it does. So yeah.
Great. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about like what happens from there. So, we get someone applying for a job, they submit that resume, you're doing that initial screen. How do you go through hundreds of resumes, whittle that down to, 10, 20, 50, to then hand off to the engineering manager going, we think these are going to be good? Or do you do the initial phone screen and say, we've called these 20 people and they seem okay? Or do you just hand the resumes off and have them sort of rescreen those, and then you make that first contact? Like, what does that process look like at your respective companies? Spencer, you want to go first on that?
Yeah, sure. In contingency, no one, definitely no hiring manager ever speaks to a candidate that I haven't screened personally. Oftentimes the people I'm submitting, I have the confidence of having known them for years in many cases. But yeah, I would say like similar to kind of the breakdown of like going through someone's LinkedIn profile and kind of better understanding a bit about who they are. Usually for me, it's a mix of kind of sitting down, having a conversation with that person, putting together a bit of a packet of coverage for my hiring manager.
Okay.
And generally like the format is like, okay, tell me your story, talk me through your resume beyond what I can read. I want to like hear how you tell the story of your career, how you're going to interview, how you're going to present. And then we kind of like either speed up or slow down depending on how granular and how brief they can be. Because that's ultimately the balance of telling a story.
Sure.
And then from there, it's really just a matter of kind of like presenting notes to my hiring manager and saying like, look, this person doesn't have exactly the years of experience with this, but here are the analogous things that make me think they could be good for this. They have a passion for your space. You're a music notation app, and this person played in a band and reads and writes music. Like, usually it's this conversation of like, okay, here's what you asked for. Here's what I'm giving you and why. So there's at least a conversation before just dropping someone on a hiring manager. But I would say like my reputation has consistently been built on the notion that my hiring managers don't have to do that triage anymore. They just
Right.
get a resume, and there's a good shot they're going to go to finals.
Okay, great. Aaron, what about your system at Procore? How does that work?
Yeah, so I have over the years, I've just put together a pretty extensive kickoff process that I have with the hiring manager. Whenever they want to open a role, I have like my 20, 25 questions that I go through in 30, 40 minutes to make sure I fully understand everything they're looking for. So whenever I'm going to interview a candidate, I already have usually a list of set questions that I'm going at to make sure I can hit all the different points. And like Spencer was saying, present the hiring manager with someone that should most likely move forward. And I am usually the decision maker in that first round. If I interview someone and they miss on 5 out of 8 questions, then it's like I don't need to even ask the hiring manager. Like, I saw this resume, I knew what the hiring manager would have wanted. I screened them, they didn't pass, and so that entire process, the hiring manager never even knows about. My goal is to guard their time. And so so I try to give them just the best candidates and that have a surefire chance of moving forward.
How do you both feel about guys like me who are trying to coach people on how to interview? That maybe they do really well on an interview, but then they get into the job and they actually don't perform well, or vice versa. They're a really, really good developer, but they don't interview well. They're going to lose out on opportunities because they don't interview well, or they interview really well, but then they get into the job and they're like, oh, that person's not working out, and they like get cut right away. Like, have you ever seen that happen in your careers, or like what sorts of scenarios, like what sort of signals would you look for around those kinds of things, both for people that don't interview well and people that interview well but can't actually do the job?
So I've experienced both of these situations. So I'd say for someone who interviews really well, but can't do the job, it's interesting because I've had hiring managers say, well, it's one in particular, and then I kind of thought about this as I've progressed through my career, because I think it's ultimately a pretty decent thought. So I remember we were in a roundup for a candidate where the whole panel gets together and talks about this candidate. And he said, this guy nailed all the interviews. I'm not sure about the actual experience. I don't know how he'll do in this job, but he's either going to do really well or he is going to crash and burn, and we'll know very quickly if we need to let him go. And so he was like, we should take this chance because he has a very good shot of doing really well. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. It's like, if he's going to fail, he's going to fail fast, and we'll realize it. And so I was like, okay, that I've just thought about that a lot throughout my career. And then the flip side, I think I've also had conversations with hiring teams, and a lot of times this will kind of be my subject matter expertise, just because I've interviewed thousands of people. I can kind of help coach some of the interviews and say, hey, like, this person has really, really solid experience. Like I'm looking at all of your notes and you all really like their experience. I think they're bad at interviewing, and that's okay, but they're going to do really well in this role. And I'll try to kind of get their thoughts on that. But and we've hired people who it's like, they're really bad at interviewing, but they're going to do great in the job. So so I think that's almost on the recruiter to help train their interviewing teams.
Good.
I would even dare say it's a conversation of like training the candidate as much as it is training the interviewer. Like, I've had hiring managers in engineering who are like, they almost like to be secretive about their process because they don't want someone figuring it out. And one of my best and longest running clients is actually a company that is building technology to improve the interview process. And one of the pieces of research they cite a lot is that you can actually show more about a candidate by fully informing them of everything they expect. Literally the questions they're going to be asked in an interview, and letting them prepare more so than like seeing how somebody acts when they're surprised and caught off guard, which is kind of suboptimal for a work environment anyway.
Right.
But I think about this experience I had with a candidate where I was interviewing her and she came off almost like rude. Like, I thought she was actually annoyed to be talking to me, and as we got to the end of the interview, she started to kind of warm up a little bit. And by the end of the interview, I was like, this is actually, I feel strongly about this candidate. Like, if I was going off the first half, I wouldn't have recommended submitting her to this client. And when I submitted her, I was very clear with the hiring manager. I was like, this was my experience of her. You tell me if you have the same experience. I'm advising her that she comes off, like, I straight up told her, I was like, you come off a little cold in the beginning. And she's like, yeah, I get nervous. So I was like, keep that in mind and try to improve on that. And I was able to have this three-way conversation between her and the hiring manager of like, yeah, there was market improvement. Yes, I see what you're talking about. But you know what? It's fine. It's not a deal killer. I feel like that level of transparency just helps everybody.
Yeah. We interviewed a candidate at a job one time who was clearly the smartest person in the room, and they knew it. And so they actually came off really arrogant. And when we did kind of the full group thing at the end, we're like, all right, should we hire them? Like, who here thinks they passed the interview? And like everybody put their hand up. And then we're like, all right, who wants them on their team? Nobody put their hand up. And we're like, well, if they're smart and they did well in the interview, why does nobody want to hire them? And they're like, he's kind of a jerk. It's like, all right, then we don't make an offer. And I would always like to ask questions like, would anybody be disappointed if we don't hire the person? Would you be, excited to have them on your team, or would you be disappointed if we didn't make an offer? Because sometimes that can be really telling too. As Aaron mentioned, like sometimes the engineers that are actually doing the interview, they can kind of suss out like, oh yeah, this person really knows what they're talking about, but like getting under their or sort of getting through the anxiety and nervousness and coming across cold or things like that. Like once you break them out of that shell, sometimes it's a whole different picture. And I've had interviews like that as well, where it's like you got to find just that little something, and then like they just won't stop talking about a particular thing.
So
one that sorry, go ahead.
I do actually have an anecdote about someone we hired, literally like employee number 12, who didn't work out after 3 months of effort.
Wow.
Like he was we were basically looking for a Python engineer, and we're supposed to have like a senior most, like someone to essentially come in with a bunch of people who had been working in Go a lot, who needed more of a Pythonic expert to plant that corner post for us. And we started looking way too hard for Python experience. And the person didn't have a ton of startup experience, but they seemed a cultural fit. And I should have known the red flag came like right after they accepted their offer. We started talking about gear, and like my CTO comes from a security background, and she was like, yeah, we don't let people use their own laptops. So you'll be telling us which MacBook Pro you want. And he was like, I use my ThinkPad in Linux, and I use them, and I'm not interested in using PyCharm. And like we had to have like a 2-hour discussion on a weekend about who was going to budge. And I guess the phrase I go back to that I've used multiple times since starting here is, if it was going to be easy by now, it probably would. And like you can come across these impasses where sometimes people will even be like, they'll put up things that like make it hard to close them, that almost makes it feel like they don't want the job but don't want to say so. Like weird social cues that come up in the interview. Like if we had like in retrospect, if we had that conversation about gear come up, like we would have absolutely not gone forward. The person we ended up hiring, like, we're an environment where you have to essentially be able to deploy your own AWS environment, and like we're a serverless environment, and they weren't prepared to kind of catch up in that regard. And it was something that we weren't necessarily able to suss out in the interview, because it's a CTO interviewing a senior engineer. So yeah, it's I guess it's like, it's one of those things that like we try to be very, very sensitive to possible flags and be very risk averse in that regard, especially at such an early stage.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I think there was another scenario that I had where the person was just, I was interviewing, it was when I was at SendGrid, and the person was just not super talkative, and they were trying to work through like a code challenge or something. It was like it was the second last or the very last whiteboard coding interview I ever did. This was like 2012. And these last two were like the clincher for me of like I'm never gonna like have people write code on a whiteboard anymore. And I would always like since then I tell people like bring your laptop, bring tools that you're comfortable with, that you're familiar with, and it's going to be code that you know, like that we're going to have you work on. Like try to stay away from like the leak code challenges and things like that. But there's one guy, I gave him the kind of the tech challenge that we were going to do, and he uncaps his marker and he just sort of stands there with the marker against the whiteboard. His back is to me, so I can't see if he's writing anything. And so I'm kind of trying to look around him a little bit. And then I realize he's just standing there with the marker on the board for like 2 minutes. He's just standing there. He's not writing anything. He's not saying anything. And I'm like, all right, this is like super awkward for me as the interviewer. Probably more so for him because he's probably like nervous and like, oh, I'm gonna crash and burn or whatever. Like I didn't know what was going through his mind, and I'm like, I gotta break the ice. So I'm like going through his resume again real quick, trying to think of something to say to like get him going. And he had a project on there, or some mention about comic books or something like that. And I'm a huge comic nerd, and so I kind of speak up at one point. I'm like, hey, I don't know if you checked out my LinkedIn, but it turns out I got kicked out of Xavier's School for the Gifted because I can't read minds. So you're gonna have to like fill me in on what you're thinking. And he's like, oh well, I was thinking about this algorithm, blah blah blah, and he wrote the whole thing top to bottom, all in one pass, and it was perfect and brilliant. And he was just thinking about the problem. But then he started talking about comic books, and then he just wouldn't shut up about comic books. It's like, okay, well, we're here to do coding. But like just trying to find that common ground to like do some kind of icebreaker. Um, but yeah, I think sometimes trying to find like the culture fit and the technical fit, it's a tricky balance sometimes. Like I interviewed at Yahoo back when it was cool to work at Yahoo. I'm sure it's still cool for some folks to work at Yahoo. So if you're watching this stream later and you work at Yahoo, this is just my opinions. But I was interviewing with them, and they were asking me all these questions about PHP, and I was doing well. And I got through the technical interview, and I think I did okay on the tech interview. Like I felt good about my answers and how I was presenting things. And they're like, all right, well, we got like a handful of questions to kind of wrap up. And I'm like, sweet, what do you got? And they're like, who won the last Super Bowl? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, who won the last Heisman Trophy? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, who's your favorite football team? And I'm like, I live in LA, so I guess the Raiders. Not remembering that they had since left LA and they weren't even in LA anymore. And they're kind of looking at each other around the table, and they're like, you do realize you're interviewing with a fantasy football team at Yahoo to come work on our team here? And I'm like, no, nobody told me that. I'm like, I asked the recruiter what to study. They told me to study design patterns, not NFL stats. And so I was like trying to backtrack, and I'm like, well, I'm from Canada. We don't have NFL. We have CFL. The field's 110 yards long, not 100, and it's narrower, and we get 3 downs instead of 4. And ours is called the Grey Cup, not the Super Bowl. They didn't care. I'm like, ask me stats about hockey, and they're like, we're not the fantasy hockey league, like we're fantasy football. And so I didn't get the job because I wasn't a culture fit. So that's like one of my other favorite stories to tell. How do you, or where in the process do you try to do like a similar kind of culture sort of fit? Because like you can fit in really well on that technical level, but kind of that other example of like the person's a jerk and no one wanted them on their team. Like how do your teams try to figure out like how are they going to fit in culturally? Like is that part of the usual process, or do you like take them out for a lunch, or like what does that look like on your individual teams?
Yeah, I think for us, culture fit is just throughout the entire process. I mean, and we do have some interviews that touch specifically on Procore's values, and that's usually part of the panel if they get that far. But myself and the hiring manager, and if there's a technical screen as well before the panel, all we're thinking about culture fit the whole time. And occasionally, we sometimes will have questions around that of just, and it can be as simple as like, hey, like, did you get a chance to look at Procore's values? And if so, like, what did you think? And we just say, and if they say no, I didn't, I say, oh, okay, well, their openness, optimism, and ownership. What do you think by like what does that mean to you? And I don't make it like, oh, like gotcha, you didn't study. I just tell them, I'm like, yeah, like just what does that make you think about? And so because I think, and this kind of ties back to maybe some of the other questions as well. I always try to tell candidates, like, I am on your side. Like, I am a recruiter. Like, I want to hire you so I don't have to
Mhm.
hire for this role anymore.
Right.
Like
Yeah, exactly.
my job is to fill roles.
Mhm.
And so I really try to make it like it's not us versus you. Like, we're not trying to stop you. Like, we want to fill this role. We need to hire this person.
Right.
So I try to prep candidates and as much as I possibly can. And I know we talked about yeah, kind of not trying to trick candidates or something like that. Like, I try to prep them, especially for technical screens. That, like, this is what they're gonna be coding in. Here are the fundamentals they're gonna cover. You can ask questions. You can Google things.
Oh, cool.
Like,
Nice.
this is very much like a code pairing. Like, it's not like they're just gonna sit and watch you. And then I tell the hiring teams, we don't want to pull the rug out from under them. We want to simulate an actual working environment. Like, how will it be working with this person? Because
Mhm.
when they actually have the job, you're not going to be sitting there trying to trick them
Right.
with different code
Yeah.
questions.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that's my goal, like, in the interview process.
Yeah. Spencer, any thoughts?
Yeah, on the subject of cultural discussion, I think Aaron makes a really good point. I used this phrase the other day talking with an engineer of mine. It's the subject of like meta discussion. It's the I observed this, I feel this way kind of thing. It's the bread and butter of all of my relationships and all of my working relationships
Right.
with my hiring managers and my candidates. It's something I look for constantly. Like, I would say the far end, like, opposite of the gold standard is that I'm literally judging somebody by how they treat the help. If somebody takes attitude with the recruiter, they don't realize how much power a recruiter has over the
Yes.
pipeline, because we're pretty much the first and final voice on any hiring decision.
Yep.
I can actually use a really good example. We had a candidate that we were interviewing who came on referral, and the behavior was almost belied that this candidate thought they were already hired. And
Oh, wow.
they also had a lot of assumptions about what it meant to come work at a startup. And my key concern was that they'd never worked in a startup. So they didn't necessarily understand what it means to build from zero. In this case, it was design, and they were having a lot of conversations about, like, oh, we're going to get your user testing up to snuff. And I was like, no, we're not. We're a 9-person startup right now.
Yeah.
That's not how this works. We're going to do things and be resourceful in a way that get us to a similar location in the meantime. But the biggest tell was that they were getting an offer from another company. They didn't want to tell me what their offer was, and they expected that we would be able to match it once they did tell me. And they got really upset when I explained to them that a startup is not a 500-person company with the same budget.
Sure.
So, like, a lot of it for me is understanding expectations and the ability to navigate life circumstances. Like, because you're ultimately pairing up someone's life with your company. And I think the ability to navigate those specifics goes a very long way. And it shows a lot in the interview, because that's ultimately our job, is to figure out, like, can we make this huge life transition work for you in a way that you're going to be happy here long term?
Right. That brings up another good question that sometimes we try to coach people on, is like, when do you talk about salary? Like, as the recruiter side of it, you want to know before starting the whole process, like, is this person going to waste our time because they're going to ask for $500,000, and or if they come in like super low ball, like they don't understand their own value, or they don't understand what salary they should be asking for in a particular market, kind of thing. And so we sometimes want to have at least some conversation around that. But then you hear folks, doing coaching online where they're like, never say a number, make the company tell you the number. And then there's certainly been a lot of stuff in the news about how in Colorado now we've passed a law that says if you post a job post, you have to put a salary range in there. And now a bunch of companies are not going to consider remote workers in Colorado because they don't want to disclose that range. How do you all feel about that discussion around salary before things kind of kick off, and like how do you sort of broach that subject with the candidates?
So I can say in California, we legally cannot ask what a candidate's
That's
current
true.
salary is.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the implications of that, both from like the perspective of the wage gap and anchoring, just because I do think anchoring puts people at a disadvantage. I've seen it consistently. It's really, really difficult because as a hiring manager, I sit next to the person with the spreadsheet who is basically keeping our burn rate in check. So I understand that if I go high on someone's salary, I have to average that out with a lower salary eventually. And I think, look, I do think that anyone who talks with a recruiter should expect to talk about salary upfront and early. I think you should also be educating yourself on what market rates are. Sometimes that can just be having a good relationship with a decent contingency recruiter, because I'm a literal anecdote repository for salary rates in Los Angeles. And usually my conversation has always been like, my mentor trained me before that law, never get off the first call with a candidate without getting their salary information, because we have to give that to our clients so they understand kind of the ballpark and expectations.
Sure.
My perspective on that was always from advisement. Oh, you're making this. You're a little low for market given your years. I think you could do a little bit better. We're going to bring you up at least this much on any company we're talking to, and I'm not going to submit you to anyone that wouldn't consider at least this much money. Like, that's usually the way I kind of frame it, is like, your expectations for market are totally reasonable, or you should expect to go work for Riot Games or Netflix if you want to make that kind of money, which is totally fine, but you're not going to go work for a Series A backed startup for that kind of salary.
Aaron, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely different at Procore, and it's been different at some of my other companies. Bird was pretty flexible because they were also just a crazy fast-paced, like, first-year startup. I mean, with Procore now, we have set levels for every single role. Every department has a budget. If they want to open a role that comes from their budget, they know the exact salary range that they're looking for that role. So, and they build that into the budget. So my conversations, I always try to get salary information in the first call. But yeah, and I know, you know, just being from California, yeah, whenever they made the law, we just went from saying, like, you know, what's basically, what are you making, to like, what are your expectations moving into your next role? Like, what are you looking for? And so you know, they don't have to tell me what they're making now. And so I still ask that. I just say, like, what are your expectations around salary? We also ask, you know, what is your desired salary in our application? And they don't have to answer that if they don't want to. And, you know, sometimes candidates will tell me, you know, oh, that's negotiable. We can explore that as I learn more about the role. I'm like, cool, that's fine. And I'd say the vast majority of the time, I say, well, our range is this, so I just want to make sure I'm not wasting your time. And then they say,
great.
oh yeah, okay, well, yeah, and then they totally, and I kind of go back to, I'm on your side. I said, I tell them, I want to get you the best offer possible. I want something that you're going to be happy with, and if not, then, you know, if it doesn't work out, that's okay. I tell them, you know, I will fight for you. I will go to compensation. I will go to finance. I will go to the hiring manager. I will try to make a case for anything you ask for. A lot of it depends on how the interview process goes. And then they said, okay, like that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I've seen this many times where a candidate will interview and they'll just blow it out of the water. And if we're not meeting their compensation expectations, sometimes we'll up level the role. It's like, okay, well, you know, this was a manager role that we had. They're clearly at a senior manager level. So let's make a case to up level this role, and we'll figure it out. And so, you know, that can happen. Yeah, that's kind of how we approach it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I think you make a really good point, though. It's something that I've talked about a lot with a lot of friends. It's like, it's the subject of, like, there has to come a point in the salary discussion where somebody shows their belly. It's a little bit of like a gesture of good faith to say, like, because that's when you talk about culture, like, most of the people that I find are a culture fit for humility is usually someone who's going to come out and say, like, look, I'm making this, I'm flexible, this is what I'm hoping for, you tell me. Like, they'll just kind of put the cards on the table and go, let's figure this out. It doesn't put you at the best advantage, but it also makes the process more pleasant, which I think is ultimately the goal.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
and I like candidates where they tell me their expectations, and I say, hey, like, we're not going to hit that. I'm sorry, like that's completely out of the range. What do you think? And I'll say, like, we have equity, we have bonus, we have these types of benefits. Like, what matters the most to you? Is it just straight cash, or maybe if we could flex up on the equity, like, does that help? And then we have that conversation up front. But, like, yeah, because my goal, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste my team's time. I don't want to waste the candidate's time. So I think it's good to get all that stuff just out up front.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, and I approach a lot of my conversations the same way. Like when I did this job change too, I was pretty upfront, similar to what Spencer was just saying. Is like, you know, I may not tell you what I'm making now, but I'm going to say like, hey, this is what I'm looking for, salary wise, equity wise, because, lifestyle, I got a mortgage to pay and whatever. Like, I need to make like a certain amount of money, but at the same time, I'm not one of those, like no offense to Bay Area people, but I'm not going to ask for Bay Area salary at anything that I do. Just for me, it was pretty instilled pretty early on. Like if you make a ridiculous salary, you should be doing a ridiculous amount of work. And it's like I want to balance life a little bit in there. So I don't want to feel like I should be working like 100, 150, 200 hours a week. I've had those jobs in the past and they suck. And so
Yeah.
I'm happy now working my 40, 50 hours a week at my salary within that range that I'm comfortable at, and going from there. Um, cool. Let's switch gears a little bit because we kind of touched on this topic a little bit earlier about cover letters. So I did some research on cover letters a couple of years back, and the research that I found said only about 30 to 33 somewhere percent of recruiters at the time actually read a cover letter. When companies started going remote and quarantining, that number jumped up to like 80%. Someone else did some research over the summer and fall last year, and they're like, yeah, cover letters are now being read by closer to 80% of recruiters. Where do you fall on that? Because you got a lot of resumes to read through. Like, do you only read the cover letter, or the resumes that really stand out, or do the cover letters help them stand out? Like, what's your take on a cover letter? Is it a good use of time? Is it a waste of time?
I think it's a good use of time. I will, I don't always read them. I don't always read the entire thing, but whenever I am in my applicant tracking system, it puts the cover letter and the resume. Like as I scroll down, I see their application questions.
Mhm.
Desired salary, location. Do you need a visa sponsorship or anything like that? I see those questions first, and when I keep scrolling, it's the cover letter and then the resume. So I have to scroll past the cover letter to get to the resume. If I'm looking for specific keywords or something like that, I might just be going straight to resumes, especially if there's a ton. Yeah, I mean, I will always at least look at the first line or two of the cover letter. I think what can stand out to me is Spencer mentioned this earlier of when they call out the company and the position specifically, when they talk about the research they've done or why they think they're a fit for this particular role. That is just way better. It really shows they've done the
Mhm.
research. I see so many things of like I think I'd be a great fit at your company, and it's like okay, this is just a form letter. I
Yeah.
don't need to read it at all. So
Right.
if I see the company name or the role title in the very first line or two, and I see that maybe they personalized it, I'll definitely take more time to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say similarly, kind of what I was saying earlier. I was definitely in the 30% to begin with. But it's interesting coming into my startup, like we have a Slack that just kind of takes all of our submissions. And I remember going through when I got here after they'd been running for a year just on like passive built-in submissions. And I was appalled at how many people just put the resume and the link and sent it through with like, I would like to work at, I filled in the blank of your company name. Thank you for your consideration.
Right.
And every now and then, like it almost feels like a drink in the desert when you get somebody who actually hand wrote something.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
anything, because it's actually surprisingly rare. Like, that's one thing I would say is like, if there's a place where there's just so much low hanging fruit, it's like go read about the hiring manager who's connected to the role and find something interesting. You can always
Yes.
find something interesting about the company, the job, the department,
Right.
the problem space. Like as a recruiter, we sit there doing outreach and think about this stuff constantly when trying to engage people and get their attention. So you're playing to the way we think when you come in and say, like, I personalize this message.
Right.
I think it goes a really, really long way.
Yep. How do you feel about to whom it may concern versus like they do research to actually find the name of a person to address it to or a team kind of
Oh yeah.
thing? Like how do you feel about
I'm
those?
really curious what Spencer thinks.
I glaze over on to whom it may concern. I think we have entered an age where formality, like I help many people in my company write like letters to VCs, copy for our website, my outreach copy. And one of the things I'm finding more and more is that like formality is kind of becoming a faux pas. Like and you're talking about personalization, but I will also point out that like a rigidity in communication that doesn't feel like a conversation, I think is problematic because it kind of just makes people glaze over. But I think if you're able to like, I think it can be a stretch to like, oh, you're the director of engineering at this company, I'm going to send you a LinkedIn invite and ask you to get coffee. Like, unless you are a hot commodity who they really want to hire, you're probably creating an undue burden for them. But I think it's probably different for you, Aaron, because like you're in a bigger company where everything kind of has to go through you and then route to a department.
Yeah, so I was gonna say I have no problem with to whom it may concern, because I like, if they want to be more formal, that's fine. I think this might totally be just a personal thing for me. Whenever they get it wrong, whenever they like address it to the wrong person, it just kind of hurts me a little bit. And so again, yeah, that might just be me.
Rather be generic than wrong.
yes, exactly. So yeah, that's kind of where I land. And so, but if I see that they've done their research in general, that is mainly what I'm looking for. But yeah, I don't like it when they address it to like the wrong manager and they address it to like our CEO. I'm like, do you really think he's reading this?
Right.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, at a startup, probably,
exactly.
But
So
in a larger company, not so much. Yeah. And
no,
I've
in
said
fact,
on the
like my CEO will come through and say like, I really like this person's resume, and look at how nice this cover letter was. They said these nice things about me. Like, like we will actually get those things sometimes.
Flattery can get you everywhere. At a startup. Yeah, I often tell people on the stream, like when I'm screening a resume, I'm looking for a reason to say no. But if I've got you on the phone and I've got you in the interview process, I'm looking for a reason to say yes. It's kind of like what Aaron was saying, like, I want to hire you so I can just stop hiring for this role. Like, please be the person I'm looking for. But a lot of job posts is, we talked about this on a stream last week with Jesse. It's really my Christmas wish list. Like, these are things I hope I can find some mythical unicorn with all 50 things on this bullet point list. How do you sort of rein in your engineering teams around like, okay, what really matters and what's nice to have? Like, over time I started rewriting my posts. Like, you must absolutely have these 2 or 3 bullet points, but then here's like 15 other bullet points that are like, the icing and sprinkles on the cupcake kind of thing, if you happen to have these other things. But these things you absolutely must have. How do you sort of manage that in your teams?
I asked them in the kickoff meeting. That's kind of the point of my kickoff meeting, is I asked them like, what are the absolute deal breakers? At first I asked, what is your ideal candidate? Like, what is everything you would want in this person? And I'd make the whole list and I say, okay, like what are the absolute deal breakers? If they don't have this, I automatically reject them. And then they're like, oh, and then they kind of think through them again. I say, okay, like now I know what I can flex on, and now I know like what the top things are.
Yeah, good. Spencer,
yeah, I think it's similar for me. I do agree, like the way you put that is really good. Like my mentor's phrase used to be, the resume is the sales document that gets you the interview. Always thinking about it in terms of like, you only put so much on your resume to kind of validate that it's time to go to the interview. And then there's other information that you save for the interview. That's part of kind of like telling your story.
So the resume is like the teaser trailer, right? Kind of thing, like entice me to call you, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, the best jokes in the movie. You're gonna spoil them right up front.
That's great. Cool. What else should people know? Any other thoughts on like topics about the process? Like, what else do you want to chat about?
I have a gold standard. So we interviewed a candidate somewhat recently who was like cusping on senior enough for our UI team, and they did okay in the interview, but they were really nervous. And we even did a second round with another interviewer just to be sure it wasn't even like a certain amount of like gender disparity of like a woman interviewing with a guy feeling a little uncomfortable. Maybe a woman and a woman would be easier, but like we finally came back, like, because the questions that were asked were just like, tell me about a bug that you squashed that was really hard or interesting, like just kind of getting into stories that'll kind of tell how somebody thinks and works. and they just were too nervous to kind of like tell their story effectively, and we just couldn't get past it. And the way I gave the feedback was like, I'm sorry, we don't feel we can provide you the mentorship you would need to be successful here. And their reaction was like the nail in the coffin. It was, what did I say that made you think I mentored? And I was like, oh gosh, you're in your 3rd year. Like, I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm still looking for my next mentor. I'm listless without one. Like, CTOs have mentors. Like, the gold standard for me in a candidate is I want to know that you're looking for your next mentor. And I want to know that you're identifying it as you go through the interview process, because that person should probably be somewhere in the company, and you're probably going to latch on to them for the next few years and learn as much as you can.
Yeah.
But if you're not thinking terms, like, you're probably approaching the interview wrong.
Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah,
Aaron,
I
any
think
thoughts?
a couple things. Yeah, I think a couple things that are relevant for what we've talked about so far. I would say that I feel like the resume is where you kind of really show your experience and you can add some personality. And I feel like the cover letter is where you really show your personality and you add some more of your experience in there. And how I tell people to break down their cover letter is talk about why you're interested in the company and kind of who you are, why you're interested in this particular role, and then why you feel like your background would be a fit for that role. If you want to kind of break it up in like 3 different paragraphs, just as kind of general themes. And I feel like that helps people get their juices. It's supposed to like supplement the resume. And then I think in terms of interviewing, I always try to break people out of interview mode, and I know we talked about that as well. Just I always tell people, like, just you got to be yourself, because they want to see who they're going to be working with, like who they're going to be sitting next to or zooming with every day. So I always tell people, just let your guard down, just like tell stories and you know, ask really good questions as well. And I think that can go a really long way. And I think the other thing that I experience a lot, especially recently, we're just hiring a ton, is people who are kind of spam applying on Indeed or Monster or Glassdoor or whatever. And when I get them on the phone, the first question I always ask is, why are you interested in Procore? I don't say, why are you looking for a new role?
What's
I say, why are you
Procore?
interested in Pro? Yes, that's exactly what happens. Some people will say, oh, I saw this on LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for a new role. I'm like, okay. Wow. I'm like, yeah, I think this is like the yeah, I know. And they're like, I think this is like the software company, right? I'm like, oh no, like this is not going to go well. So
you pay salaries, right?
Yeah.
you give me money for work. So I think, you know, I always tell people, like, if you get an interview, like, research the heck out of that company as much as you can. But before you get on that call, and it'll go such a long way. We just had, we're hiring for some interns, and I got on the phone with this intern. I mean, he's I think he's a sophomore in college, and he knew more about Procore than I did. Wow. And he was like spouting off things. He was like, yeah, and he had some of the best questions I've ever been asked. He asked me, what do you want your legacy to be at Procore? And I was like, what?
Wow.
I don't know. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this kid is phenomenal. And so I couldn't wait to put him in front of the hiring manager. But he was spouting off like all the recent news articles, different fundraisers we did, how we went public, companies we've acquired. I'm like, oh my goodness, man! Like, you are. I don't know half the answers to these questions. So I mean, if candidates like that are just money.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like, similar to that, the number one thing you can't have is no answers when someone asks, what questions do you have for me? That's just like, that's a big no-no.
Yeah, Aaron and I both talk about that. Aaron does it on his channel, and I mention it a ton on the stream. Like, you have to have some kind of question. So let's wrap up with what sticks out to you. Actually, I've got 2 things, and then we'll kind of wrap up. So this one, what are like some of the Aaron kind of touched on the best one, but what's the best and worst question that you've been asked when you got to, do you have any questions for me?
I think so. I'm gonna say, I would say that intern asked some of the best questions. Like, what legs do you want to leave at a company? That was phenomenal. One thing I've been asked is, what would it take for you to leave your company? And I was like, oh wow, like that is a really, because the candidate wanted to know, like, what do I feel strongly about with this company, and like what would it take me to leave? And I was like, man. And then they asked the hiring manager that as well, and the hiring manager said, if Elon Musk called me and asked me to come to SpaceX, I would. That's why I would leave. And then okay, like people love this company, and so for the candidate, I was like, man, that's a good question. And I think the worst question I'm probably asked, and maybe it's the worst just because I'm asked it pretty much every time, but it's like, what's your favorite thing about the company, or why do you like working there, or I don't know, just kind of like those generic questions. I don't know, just almost every candidate asks it. I just kind of wish there was more depth to it. And at halftime, I feel like they're not even listening. They're just asking it because they think they should ask it. So I also, I think better, I like questions that are more about the department, about the role, or maybe about specific things they've researched about the company. But if they just say, oh yeah, why do you like working there? Like, okay, like, yeah, you feel like someone told you to ask questions, and so you're just trying to come up with something. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of, yeah.
This could be the best or the worst. I feel like it's becoming popular in terms of how it's advised. But my mentor and I used to promote it quite a bit because I do find it at once disarming and also very useful. It's the question at the end of the interview, just asking someone, how did I do? I find most hiring managers will straight up tell you like, oh, well, yeah, you did pretty good. Here's what my recommendation is going to be. It makes it so you can actually go away and feel confident that you're not wondering how it went. I know some people who get a little bit annoyed by it because it can come up quite a bit, but I do find it to be, like, again, it goes back to that meta discussion of like, I think if anybody's going to be working with a boss or a hiring manager long term, they want to know where they stand. Like, my CTO has one-on-ones with every single one of her reports weekly. And like, her whole attitude has always been like, there are no surprises. You're always going to know where you stand with me. So I feel like people who are kind of fostering that with the people they're working with, I do think it's useful.
Yeah. So now you're bringing up more questions that I hope we have time to get to. I appreciate your time helping us on the stream, so I don't want to like overstay anything, but these are raising more questions now around if a candidate asks for feedback, will your company give feedback? Because there's kind of this myth out there of, if we give the candidate feedback, we're going to get sued or something like that. And Aileen Lerner from interviewing.io, her team actually did a bunch of research and found that exactly 0 companies have been sued for giving a candidate feedback. So, I mean, I've been that hiring manager too, where you kind of skirt around like, well, you did okay, but we're just going in a different direction, or, we decided to go forward with someone else and not really give feedback or just not answer the question at all. How do you personally, and then how does your company feel about actually giving tangible feedback to a candidate about like, if they didn't do well, like what could they improve on? Where do you sort of stand on that topic?
I am very, very pro feedback, and I've always given feedback anytime I possibly can. At Riot and Procore, Bird too. Bird just was so new; it didn't have like a formal system. But for Riot and Procore, if a candidate goes through a panel, we offer a feedback phone call if they don't make it. At Riot, they actually did. The hiring manager would have to call them and give them feedback. At Procore, I do it, and I will get feedback from the team, or I'll go through all the different scorecards and see kind of what they said. So I will call them. If they only were in phone screens, I'll usually give. I will always give feedback if they ask for it. I don't always offer like a phone call or anything like that. But yeah, I am very, very pro feedback. I think it's really helpful, and I've seen many candidates take the feedback and come back 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and get hired. So I think it's it's really valuable.
You're actually reminding me of an interview. It was like a panel interview with like 3 titans in like VP of sales positions, like women in sales. And one of them was talking about how she got feedback from the recruiter and was like, put me on the phone with the hiring manager now. Like, I want to talk to her. I want to clear this up. And she literally like talked herself into the job because of a miscommunication.
That's great.
I was like, I mean, sales, you better be able to do that. Sure. But like, I do think I'm a huge proponent of feedback. I give it whenever I can. I've had a couple of clients who were like hardliners, no feedback. I do think there are candidates that I have worked like the candidate that I mentioned who was asking like what was it that I said that made you think I needed a mentor. That was actually a case where I could see that their confidence was waning as it was. And I gave them the feedback of like, you know, very softly, like, here are the broad strokes of why this isn't going to work. And then when they came back and asked, they wanted more feedback. So I gave them like a page and a half of like, here's what I hope will help you. So like, I'm the kind of person that I usually go for brevity and clarity in like a few sentences if I can. I'll usually get on the phone with them, but I'll go all in if I have to, just to make sure someone feels like they at least have a sense of closure. Because if someone's going to get to like even a first round past me, it's going to be a not no, but not yet most times. There are occasional cases where someone will just be like, oh my gosh, there's no reason we would ever hire this person in the next 5 years. But for the most part, we're usually interested in keeping that line open. And I'll say this, I've definitely seen companies that have burned bridges almost programmatically because they would have someone go through like panel interviews and take home exercises and then be like, we will no longer be considering your application. Like, thank you for your 6 hours of time. Like,
I've heard stories of people going through like, oh, I'm on like my 6th round or 10th round of interviews, and then they get rejected. It's like, why? Like, if you can't find out in like 1 or 2 rounds, like you're doing something wrong, or you're like way too picky or something. But yeah, I think one of the best things I ever got asked in an interview was, you know, the HR team actually gave the candidate the list of all the people that were going to be interviewing them. And when they showed up to the interview, they asked like, you know, I looked at your LinkedIn history and saw that you typically stay at a job like a year and a half. You've been at this job for like 3+ years. What keeps you here? And I'm like, well, that's creepy. Wow. They're like stalking me online. But at the same time, like that's why we get, you know, tell them who they're going to interview with, is so that they can do that research. But it was super thoughtful. Like, it wasn't like a, you know, oh, well, I'm just going to ask this thing. Like, they were legitimately curious, like, why was I staying at that particular company for such a long time? And I'm like, that's a great question. Like, I'm really glad that you asked that. I'm like, the technology is a lot of fun, but it's the people. It's the people that I work with that keep me here. Because no matter what we face, we got each other's back. Whatever we're facing, we've got a team around us. You're never alone on something. Like, that kind of, like, just the camaraderie of what we've built as a team is what keeps me here. So yeah, technical challenges are going to come up. Things are going to break in the middle of the night and whatever, but you know, you've got like 4 people you can call, and they're all happy to wake up and get online and like help you through that thing. And like, everyone's going to go to bat for everybody. Like, it was such an amazing sort of team environment that we were fostering there. But it was like super thoughtful question. Last one that we'll get to, and then we'll do some fun. The industry seems to be kind of positioning itself right now to where a lot of the open roles are looking for senior level, but there's a lot of new grads coming out, like computer science kind of roles, lots of boot camps, like new boot camps are coming up all the time, coding programs like Turing. You know, they're like getting lots of graduates out there, but it seems like fewer companies are hiring for those entry level roles. Do you advise people like apply for that job anyway? Or do you say like, oh, you know, like you really should wait for like a more entry level role? Or do you say like, hey, just connect and network with the company, and if we have something, we will get in touch with you? What advice would you give to like the new grads, the new folks trying to get that first dev job, when a lot of companies tend to be looking for more senior, more experienced, seasoned kinds of people for their teams?
Yeah, I think I would highly encourage internships while you're in school, because that will help you get some of that real world experience. So finding anything you can in the summers or even part-time during the year. And then, I mean, so it's hard, especially with engineering roles, because, you know, if they're looking for someone with 3, 4, 5 years of experience, or having worked at this type of company for at least 2 years, I mean, they're going to be getting applicants who have more than that. Depending on the company, I know it's definitely different for, you know, like a 10-person startup.
Sure.
But and you know, maybe Spencer can well, yeah, I know Spencer can talk about that, obviously, but just in terms of like it might be good to go to a startup and get some of that experience where you can have like that maybe wide range of experience because maybe you're the only engineer or something like that. But
Oof, I don't think I'd want to be a new. I don't think I'd want to be a
well,
new
yes,
grad
that's
and be the only engineer at a company. That would
yeah,
that sounds like a recipe for awful. But
yeah. No, so maybe not that.
I can't speak to the subject of like getting your foot in the door as like a do this and you will get the job.
sure,
I actually gave an entire interview with my friend David Gutman, who he founded JSLA, which is the biggest JavaScript meetup in Los Angeles. It's been running for like 12 years now. He also runs a podcast and a community called Junior to Senior. A lot of what's built into JSLA is mentorship programs, because we have been seeing this in our JavaScript community for a very long time. People will get out of code school, they'll come hang out at the meetups, and they're kind of hoping to network their way into a job. But I think the way I always look at it is like, I mean, my career is, I'm in a convenient position that my career is built on relationships, but relationships are everything. Like finding a way to establish yourself as a known quantity with engineers and engineering leadership. I know a lot of people who have been grinding it out for a year or two, taking jobs that weren't so great with companies that weren't that stable, contract hire jobs that didn't turn into hired jobs, working on like HTML email templates to try to get their foot in the door, doing like actual coding.
right.
And I can say like the best expectation I can set for any code school graduates is that it's hard. It's really, really hard to break in and establish like even mid-level going on senior level title. I can also say that, I'll give you an anecdote and I'll try to be quick with it. When I first started recruiting in Los Angeles, my mentor started making me go out to big events. And I remember I like thought I had this idea in my head that I was going to go to these like big tech mixers and like I was going to say the magic words that someone was going to give me their business or I was going to get someone's resume on Monday. And I remember I went into this room. It was like DocStock had these huge mixers at the time, hundreds of people in a room after a talk. And I remember I was too nervous to join conversations when people clustered up. So I just walked around the room and made eye contact with people and then awkwardly walked away. And like, then I was just that weird guy in the room who wasn't talking to anybody.
Great.
And having been a part of a JavaScript community as a pariah, recruiters aren't really supposed to be at meetups, but I have enough friends there that I've just kind of fit in and also provided value.
Right.
I hang out in the corner with like 5 to 10 of my friends at 150 person events. And I don't really go looking to meet people. And it's my job to network.
Right.
I guess what I'm getting at is like finding communities where you can just make a friend or a few friends. I get that a lot of people feel awkward in these communities because people are constantly coming into JSLA feeling awkward. I guess what I'm saying is like, it's not about like making friends with every person in the room. It's not about like going home with a job that night, but looking that as like planting that's going to grow a tree that's going to bear fruit, like, and the timeline for that, I think is really worth keeping in consideration. As much as that's probably not the best thing someone wants to hear when they're just looking for their first job.
Yeah, I agree that networking is a big part of it. And I tell people all the time, they're called meetups, not show-ups, right? Like you're there to actually meet people. So like meet one person, like find someone that looks like you, talks like you, whatever, like go meet one person. And, the next time it'll get even easier to meet someone. Granted, a lot of them are remote and it's harder to do like a remote meetup where, maybe they got a Zoom call with a bunch of breakout rooms or whatever, and you kind of drift in and out and try to make conversation. That's hard in a remote world, but as things kind of get back in person again, like get out to those meetups. I think that networking is a really big part of it. So cool. Well, thanks guys for your time. Let's do some fun questions. Aaron, texting or talking?
Texting.
Spencer, nickname your parents used to call you?
I guess Spence. I just had, yeah.
Aaron, would you rather be able to speak every language in the world or talk to animals?
Oh, talk to animals.
Yeah, because you got cats. You love your cats.
Yeah.
Spencer, fill in the blank. Taylor Swift is...
Not something I listen to.
Aaron, is it wrong for a vegetarian to eat animal crackers?
No.
Spencer, first celebrity crush.
Oh, Jennifer Love Hewitt, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah. Aaron, if you could travel back in time, what period would you go to?
Oh man, probably. My first thought is like Vikings. I don't know. That seems, I mean, I want to like watch. I don't want to like fight Vikings or anything.
Cool. Spencer, last Halloween costume.
Oh. Oh God, this is so sad. I can't remember the last time I dressed up for Halloween. Pass.
Cake or pie?
Oh, cake or pie? Definitely pie.
All right. Aaron, you ever worn socks with sandals?
Yes.
Spencer, what does a person need to be happy?
Oh. Ah.
That one's less funny, I guess. It's a little more on a serious note. If Voldemort offered you a hug, would you accept?
No.
No? Aaron, is double dipping at a party ever acceptable?
No.
Spencer, are reindeer real creatures?
Yes.
Yeah, they are an actual real animal. Cool. Well, appreciate it, guys. I love ending on some silliness there. Really appreciate your insights and your views on kind of the HR side of things. I think it can definitely help those applying for jobs like understand like they're real humans looking at these resumes, screening through them. I think it's an interesting take that both of you are working in roles where you spend more time manually screening through those resumes as opposed to like automated systems. But in some way, you're both still looking for keywords, whether you're, kind of doing your own search, for keywords or doing it on LinkedIn kind of thing. But still like taking the time to do that. And the fact that you both also want to take the time to give people feedback, I think is tremendous. I wish more companies did that. I think more companies need to give that kind of feedback, especially when you don't do well. I mean, if you do well, your feedback's a job offer. But if you don't do well, like, sometimes it's like, you know what, like you did extremely well. This person was just like a slight notch above you. And so there's actually nothing really to improve on. It's just this other person had slightly more of what we were looking for or something. But I think it's tremendous the amount of time that you both spend kind of honing what you do and making that a better place. Tell folks how they can reach you, how they can find you, your Twitters, your LinkedIn's. Aaron, I dropped the link to your YouTube channel in there, but yeah, tell us a little bit. Let's wrap up.
Yeah, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter for me. I mean, feel free to reach out on any of them, and I usually respond as quickly as I can.
Cool.
Yep, LinkedIn and Twitter just the same.
All right, great. And so if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can go through my post history and you can see links to both Spencer and Aaron. Same with Twitter. So if you follow me on Twitter, I'm Ian Douglas 736 on both platforms. You'll be able to find my recent posts where I kind of share their details. So guys, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out, especially on the East Coast. Aaron, I know it's super late out there, but appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Definitely go check out Aaron's YouTube channel. He does a great job with just little short tips and tricks on interviewing. It's a fantastic channel. He's got lots of cool stuff on there. Thanks again for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom, guys. Really, really super appreciate it. For everyone else, we'll catch you next time. We'll get this up on YouTube in a little bit. Like, subscribe, do all those things you do, and we'll catch you in the next stream. See you, folks.
Awesome. Thanks.